Awesome. So hi everyone, I'm Katie St. Glew and I work for Defra as an evidence lead for bass and also the FMP programme as a whole. So my job is not a policymaker, I am a scientist, and my job is basically to collate and then communicate evidence and advice to support policy decisions. So I'm just going to provide a bit of a brief update on FMPs, specifically on bass. The evidence that was used to support actually developing the bass FMP, and also the evidence gaps, and then a bit about the work that we've done earlier this year to try and sort of start filling some of those evidence gaps. So firstly, I guess just as a bit of a heads up, this talk is probably not going to be as interesting and exciting as all the ones that have been this morning. There's no pretty pictures, I'm afraid. But also I do need to caveat that everything I'm about to say kind of has to have the kind of stance on it that we are immediately post-election, and all of this and what happens next is subject to the views of the new government. So just as a bit of a caveat, I'm afraid I don't know what happens next. So just to start it off, the Fisheries Act was published in 2020 and it committed the UK to developing fisheries management plans, or FMPs, to support sustainable fisheries management. Now, this remains the case unless there is a change in policy from the new government, and that would require new legislation to be put in place. So currently, the Joint Fisheries Statement commits the UK to developing and publishing 43 plans across the UK administrations, and these cover a range of species and also regional areas. Now, Defra is leading on the delivery and implementation of 15 of these plans and working with the devolved administrations on a further 24. These plans set out the policies and measures to manage fishing activity with the aim to restore and/or maintain fishing stocks to sustainable levels, while supporting a thriving fishing industry and healthy marine environment. Now, FMPs are very much a joint venture between different organisations and sectors, and are being developed with extensive stakeholder engagement, with the continued support of many of you here. So thank you for that. And so far, we have published 5 FMPs. So we've published crabs and lobsters, whelks, king scallops, English Channel non-quota species, and bass. And we are at the stage now of implementing the goals and measures as set out in these plans, whilst working on delivering the next set of FMPs. So evidence has been, and will continue to be, integral to the development, delivery, and implementation of FMPs. The first 5 were in part chosen due to their data poor nature and their need for the development of an evidence base, as well as their value and importance. These FMPs were developed using a range of evidence sources and also with stakeholder input. So to provide the actual kind of background to help write the FMPs, evidence statements were produced, and they kind of set out what we know about the stocks and those fishing them, and also the what we don't know but need to know in order to help us progress the FMPs. And these are the evidence gaps. The FMPs then went through a consultation process, so that was in summer last year, and additional evidence and also evidence gaps were highlighted and then incorporated into the process. So we're now in a position where we have numerous evidence gaps which need to be addressed to support the implementation and then delivery of the FMPs. So specifically on bass, the bass FMP was developed using a range of evidence sources. So the first was led by Policy Lab, who facilitated a co-design process with regulators, scientists and fisheries to work together and find solutions for the bass FMP, which balanced social, economic and ecological requirements. So this project ran from March to December 2022, and the final report was published during the FMP consultation. Evidence was also gathered then from internal sources and collated into an evidence statement. So this was also published during consultation, and the aim of this document was to set out the current baseline knowledge about what we know about bass, those fishing bass, and also what our knowledge gaps are. So this document collated evidence from CFAS on the biology of bass and IC stock assessments, landings data from the MMO and economic data from Seafish, and we also gathered conservation advice from Natural England and JNCC. To then gather a broader perspective on the current evidence base, a literature review was commissioned to Bournemouth University, who put together a report summarising the published evidence on bass biology, stock structure, habitat preference, migration behaviours, ecological interactions, as well as information on bass landings, discards, survival of discards, and the social and economic and regional importance of fishing bass. So a lot of what we've covered here today. And then using all of these sources and the consultation response, a list was then developed of the evidence gaps. So these are the things we still need to know to support the sustainable management of bass. So I won't go through every evidence gap, but there are some which are very specific to bass, some which relate to bass and other FMP finfish species, and some which are important to all FMP species. So those which are a bit more specific to bass are listed over the next couple of slides. And as I said, this list is not exhaustive, but it kind of gives a flavour of the types of questions we feel we need to answer in order to be able to support management decisions. So first, we've got questions relating to bass life history. So these are questions on better understanding bass as a species. So these things include stuff like understanding spawning timings, as we've discussed a lot today, and the extent to which adults return to specific spawning areas, understanding larval dispersal patterns and the relative importance of different nursery areas, and understanding environmental factors that influence recruitment success. We've then got questions on better understanding bass landings and those who are actually landing bass. So we need to better understand recreational landings. And we don't yet have a bass-specific kind of survey around the whole of the UK. So perhaps that's the evidence gap that we need something to better understand abundance and distribution around the whole of the UK. And then we also have evidence gaps on helping us understand the best course of management actions. So better understanding the impacts of like different management approaches which are suggested, better understanding stock structure to be able to support management, and also specifically for bass to quantify the benefits and limitations of size-based management. And then also we've got evidence gaps on better understanding the number and survivability of discards, as well as bycatch risk of these fisheries and how that risk is mitigated. And then we also have a whole list of evidence gaps that apply to all fish stocks and sustainable management in general. So these include the impact of fishing on benthic habitats and the wider environment and ecosystem, the impact of climate change and how fisheries can adapt to these impacts, better understanding how fisheries can support in mitigating against climate change, such as reducing vessel emissions and minimising risk to blue carbon habitats, quantifying the social and economic benefits of FMP commercial and recreational fisheries to local communities. So these are not all of the evidence gaps, but kind of a selection of areas that we do need to improve the evidence base on in order to be able to support management decisions. So we acknowledge that to successfully address this massive range of evidence gaps, we need the right people and the right organisations with the breadth of experiences and expertise to support us. Also, we do have to be aware that it's not possible or reasonable for government to fund and deliver all of these evidence gaps identified across the entire FMP programme and deliver this work in a timely manner. The amount we can do each year is uncertain, and as stated at the beginning, we do not yet know the priorities of the new government. We do have several R&D projects underway at the moment, so we are starting to contribute towards addressing some of these evidence gaps. But what we've really been trying to do is develop a collaborative and transparent approach to address these evidence gaps by working with the wider stakeholder community, such as yourselves. So we want to explore alternative options and new innovative ideas to collaboratively address the evidence gaps together. And to start this process off, to gather views on how we could do this, earlier this year we organised 2 FMP evidence workshops, which took place in February and March. So the first event was an in-person event in London, where a selected number of stakeholders were invited to attend that represented each FMP and a range of different sectors. So we had quite good attendance, and the day focused on looking at each of the evidence gaps in turn and discussing what work was already ongoing that could already start helping address some of these gaps, and how we could work more collaboratively to fill the gaps in future. And then the second event was in March, and this was online, and it was open to anyone who wanted to attend. And instead of a detailed look at each of the evidence gaps, it was a more general discussion on how do we work more collaboratively together across different sectors. So this is just a bit of a summary of some of the key messages that came out of these events that we, and I mean we by kind of generally the whole FMP community, so not just we as government, but everybody, kind of collectively decided were areas that we needed to focus on. So it was agreed that we needed to have more social and economic data. We needed more data from the recreational sector, and we needed to make better use of local knowledge. We need to involve more people from basically a wide range of different areas, and we need to improve transparency, communication, and access to data. And we need to improve existing tools to collect a wider range of data. But in order to do this, it was discussed and agreed that we need to agree on an approach to standardize and verify data collection from all sources. And we need to develop a framework and a governance structure that actually enables science to be delivered collaboratively. So I guess to just expand on that slightly, to answer all of those evidence gaps in the previous slides, we do need to be able to collect data in a way that's standardized across different gears, different areas, different regions, different times. Otherwise, unfortunately, the data is not as useful as it could be. And we also need to verify where that data's come from and how it's been collected, so that everybody across the FMP community trusts that data. But setting up these processes and ways of working takes time, and also expertise into kind of how you set up these collaborative ways of working. So these are just a couple of areas that we've kind of been grappling with and kind of discussing. But any ideas or thoughts on how we could start setting up these processes, or how different sectors could work more collaboratively together, would be really beneficial. And yeah, we value any input anybody has. I think that's all I have got time for, but hopefully this sets the scene for some of the conversations that we might have this afternoon. Yes.